Thank you, Rose. I am resource neutral, and I didn't mention tidal power, but Seth, I love it too. So just want to make sure all my bases are covered. We're very open. So thank you for creating a little time on the agenda today. As some of you may know, the decision on our clean energy implementation plan came out last Tuesday from the Commission, approving our plan that we submitted in December of 2021. So after nearly a year and a half of our plan being under review, we're glad to now be at this stage. And I wanted to share a little bit with you about the order, also acknowledging that there's a lot to unpack in it. The order is over 100 pages long. There are many conditions placed on approval of our plan. So all that to say, we're still digesting it, what it means, and how it will influence our anticipated work plan with all of you for the balance of the year. One thing is clear to me and to my colleagues, I think, which is the Commission did give us a lot of work to do, both in the short term for the biennial CEIP update and for the next CEIP. So I won't have time to go in all the details today. I would encourage you to read the order or parts of the order when you have a chance, particularly the sections around that discuss public engagement, customer benefit indicators, and vulnerable populations and vulnerability factors. We would love to have a dialogue with you and hear your thoughts on how the Commission's decision affects the work that we do here going forward. We'll follow up with you with some specific page numbers in the order. As I said, it's really long, but just hopefully to make that review a little bit easier for you. I just want to cover some brief highlights for now on the decision. The Commission generally supported and approved all of the targets we laid out in our plan. So that's our 63% renewable energy by 2025, our distributed energy resource sub-target, our energy efficiency target, and then on our demand response target, they are directing us to increase our target to include all cost-effective bids that we received during our recent request for proposals. The Commission, in their order, made it clear that future clean energy implementation plans that we submit or other utilities submit need to be more specific on the actions that the utility plans to take over the 4-year period. They were not satisfied with some of our more generalized plans for what we thought we might do from a utility scale, large scale renewable perspective, as well as providing potential DER resources and programs. So part of the requirement to move in that direction for us is, for the biennial update, we need to provide more details on our specific actions for the remainder of the implementation period, which runs through the end of 2025. Oh, and I see in the check, Monica, sorry, I will do my best with acronyms, but sometimes I forget. DER stands for distributed energy resources. Those are those small localized renewable energy sources. So if I have a solar panel on my roof, that's a distributed solar resource essentially. And there are other examples. In contrast, there's utility scale where you have a big wind facility, say, taking up quite a bit of acreage, or a solar installation that's more on a bigger scale. So that's just to compare and contrast those things. Thanks for the question. One message that came through pretty clearly in the order is, and that we definitely agree with, is really the importance of procedural justice, creating a meaningful opportunity for those affected to participate and have a meaningful impact on the decision-making process. In the order, the Commission expressed concern about our approach to public engagement and how PSE incorporates and responds to public feedback. And this is feedback from the Commission that we take very seriously as we think about our engagement, not just with our equity advisory group, with all of you, but more broadly, how we engage with the public and our other advisory groups. So we are considering a broader review of our efforts in terms of the timing and the meaningfulness of what our engagement process looks like in light of this. We also want and need to have more engagement, particularly with named communities. And then at the same time, we acknowledge that quality engagement really takes time. So we will be working with you, the EAG, to help us figure out how we can thoughtfully approach this work without overburdening all of you, overburdening our community-based organizations, and those within named communities who are burdened in too many ways already. We believe and we hope you agree that we've created a meaningful opportunity here at the EAG table for you all to participate and have an impact on our clean energy work. And at the same time, we know we can always do better in this space, and we're committed to doing better. So we appreciate the ongoing dialogue we're having with the steering committee right now, and with some of you individually on, how can we improve our feedback loop? How can we better incorporate your feedback into our work and reflect that? And what are other ways we can support you to make the time that you invest in the EAG more impactful? There are a couple other areas of the order that I want to touch on briefly. We'll spend more time on the details in our future meetings, but just wanted to give you a sense. One relates to vulnerable populations and vulnerability factors, which for those of you that have been with us since our inaugural year, we developed those vulnerability factors in partnership with all of you during that first year. The Commission discussed our methodology, they discussed the vulnerability factors, considered a lot of recommendations from other parties, and they ultimately in the order provide us with a list of additional groups or factors that need to be included as vulnerable populations. And they also directed us to work to modify our methodology for vulnerable populations, not for this biennial update, but for the next CEIP, the 2025 CEIP. So that's when we'll be diving the details with you going forward and getting some feedback on. Another area I wanted to touch on relates to benefits for highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations. In the order, the Commission looked at our proposals in our Clean Energy Implementation Plan for income eligible programs for those distributed resources, and thought that a higher portion of our distributed energy resources should be benefiting named communities. So the Commission directed that a minimum of 30% of the energy benefits for distributed solar, for demand response, and for energy efficiency should go towards named communities, 30%, and ideally focused on those with the deepest need. So that's another area we'll need to work with you on in the months ahead that we would certainly really like to work with you on. Identifying an approach to target what customers and communities may have the deepest need. The other area of the order I want to touch on relates to customer benefit indicators. As many of you know, we proposed several customer benefit indicators in our original Clean Energy Implementation Plan. The Commission and the parties to that proceeding proposed many others. The Commission, in their decision, added several new customer benefit indicators for us to begin tracking related to energy burden, arrearages, and disconnections, as well as some new metrics related to one of our CBIs. So that's another area that we'll talk about in more detail in the coming months. So again, this is a lengthy and detailed order, so I am in no way giving you sort of a comprehensive sense of what's in there. We wanted to give you a sense of some of the topics that may be of most interest to you. I also want to note that there may be some conditions in the order, the conditions being, requirements that we need to follow, that we need to clarify with the Commission to make sure we understand what they intended for us to do and that we can meet those expectations. So one example of this is there's a condition in the order that requires us to retain a facilitator for the EAG with part of their responsibility documenting EAG member feedback and then PSE's responses to that feedback. We're very fortunate to already have Rose and Lucila as our third-party facilitators for the EAG, and they've been with us since the beginning. And so we're not quite sure what the intent behind that particular condition may have been above and beyond what we already have in terms of facilitation. So that's just one example where we want to seek further clarification to make sure we're meeting the Commission's requirements and expectations as we move forward. Okay, I know that was a lot of information to throw at you. This is a lengthy order, as I said. We'll follow up with some specific sections of the order that we recommend taking a look at, and just know we'll be having a lot more conversations with you this year as we develop the biennial update, and we're happy to answer questions and do a deeper dive on all this. I just wanted to start to give you a general sense of what we're digesting right now. So with that, Rose, I'll pause and see if there are any initial questions, and happy to also take more questions offline or at our next meeting, whatever makes the most sense. Rose, you're on mute. I can't quite hear you.
Thank you, Rose. Thank you, Kara. So the feedback slide looks a little bit different this time. You normally have a table with things we heard and things we did. Last time we talked mostly about the equity forum, so there wasn't that same kind of dialogue back and forth, but there were a couple of things that kind of bigger things that wanted to bring you an update on. The first is there's a connection between the Climate Commitment Act that Wendy talked about last time and the bill discount rate program. In the email that Lisa sent you all last week, there was a PDF presentation in there with a more detailed update on the bill discount rate program. For those of you that have been here with us for a while, you might remember that Suzanne came and visited at least once since I've been with PSE, maybe twice, to talk about the new BDR program that is being implemented. So this slide is just a quick summary of what that is. And again, there's a more detailed update in your packet of materials. The program is due to launch in October. They're filing that with the Commission soon. In order to qualify for the bill discount rate program, there's no documentation required. And both the BDR and PSE Help program will use self-attestation to qualify for the BDR. There is a clause, and Suzanne mentioned this before, about 5% of folks that receive assistance will be selected for eligibility verification. So that's the point where folks might need to provide some evidence of their qualifications. The connection here that we wanted to make, the big update, is that customers enrolled in PSE Help will automatically receive the CCA bill credit. So the last time we Wendy talked about the CCA will ultimately add additional costs to each of our gas bills over time, and low-income customers would receive a credit to offset those charges. So the BDR will make it easier to make sure folks are able to receive those credits. And again, there's a lot more detail about this in your packet. And if you have more questions, we can always set up another office hour or lunch break or something with Suzanne to dive into the details a bit more. In the interest of time, let's jump to the next slide, but I'll certainly take questions if I can. This is an exciting one. So a while back, at least one, maybe two members asked if there might be availability of laptops or devices to help better participate in meetings. PSE, as a company, we can't give away company devices, but Kara and the IT team were able to procure 5 new laptops from a program with Dell where they donated the laptops for use by the EAG. So these would be community devices for current EAG members. The caveat there is we have no guarantee or even likelihood that there'll be new laptops next year or the year after, anything like that. This is sort of a one-time opportunity. So what we'd like to do is propose kind of a shared situation where we find out what EAG members would use them, and then you can use them until your term expires or a member departs, or if for some reason you don't need it anymore. Really, our goal here is to improve member participation. The thing we want to pull you on tonight is just how many members might take advantage of this. We need to put some information in the bylaws about how we would decide who gets a laptop and how long they get to keep it and things like that. But we also, if someone needs it, we want to get it out as quickly as possible. So I think Lucila's going to launch a quick poll here just so we can see how many folks might be interested. And then we'll judge if we can just make arrangements and get them to you quickly, or do we have more than 5 people and we have to figure out some way to identify who to provide it to?
Thanks, Ray. EAG members, if you can respond to that quick poll, it'd be really helpful.
Thank you. It seems like most of you have responded. I'll leave it open another minute just in case, but thanks for responding.
All right, thank you, Lucille. I think we've reached the point where we're prepared to do our break. Is there any update, Ray, though, on the equity forum, or are we going to do that a little later?
We can do it before or after Rose, whichever you prefer. There is a quick update.
Well, I'll let you do a quick update and then we can enjoy our 5-minute break. How's that?
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right, so last time we talked about you, we had an update on the equity forum. We have since met with the committee, and we just wanted to share where we're at, what we're working on. So 2 in-person family-friendly events in September. The locations are in process, but likely in Mount Vernon and somewhere in South King or East Pierce County. The primary goal, so you might remember there was some discussion about we had 3 goals and needed to prioritize them. So the primary goal is about improving understanding of challenges and barriers named communities experience related to energy. And then the audiences would be focused on CBO staff and other people, organizations who can speak to the interests of named communities. And I think for members, please chime in here, but I think the intent there is that if you know someone that can participate in this event and they will find it valuable, you should feel free to invite those folks. And we're not limiting it specifically to someone who works at a CBO. Next steps, we're working to finalize dates, times, and locations. I think what that's going to look like for you all is some kind of online survey where we send you some options and try to get some votes and figure out what works for the most people. At the next Equity Forum Planning Committee meeting, we'll have an agenda concept and be working to finalize the format, the structure of the meeting, and transition to how do we invite people. Planning Committee members, anything you'd like to add from the last time we talked?
Okay, next slide, please. This is also to just give an update to the larger EAG on the things that the steering committee have been discussing. They met a few weeks ago, and the things that are bolded were kind of the main themes that they discussed. Talked a bit about onboarding and team building, and they had a suggestion to do kind of like a member spotlight during these monthly EAG meetings, so you all get to know each other a little better. We spent a decent amount of time talking about feedback loops and meeting summaries, and they suggested the following that's on the slide, but I'll just know attaching and linking meeting minutes to the agendas so you all can see what happened at the last meeting and prepare for the meeting that's coming up. So we're going to continue those conversations with the steering committee and make some changes. And we also spoke about the community laptops that you all heard the news today, and we briefly touched on an in-person summer opportunity for you all to get together. So that's still in the works, and the steering committee will come back to that topic when they meet later in June. But that kind of gives a summary of what the steering committee has been discussing. I'll just pause a moment, steering committee members, if I missed anything, please share. Okay, I might keep us moving. All right, next slide. All right, this is also a quick one. We've been doing some drop-in sessions since we can't get to all topics here in these monthly meetings. So these are totally optional. And the Customer Clean Energy and Awareness team, they came and spoke to you a few meetings ago. They would like to offer a drop-in session so they can update you on some proposed audience framework and segments that they've been working on, and dive deeper into audience segments for their outreach that they're planning. And so I will just launch a poll with these potential dates and times. There's various options, and we're open to suggestions on top of these if you would like to share that in the chat. But I will just launch a poll to gauge general interest and availability for a potential drop-in session in July with this team. So the poll is now launched. I'll give it 30 seconds or so, let you all respond, and then we'll pass it to Brian for the next topic.
Thank you, Lucila. Please do take a moment to identify any potential time to take advantage of this. We know how busy you are, but there's so much information involved in the work that we're doing, and I think it's helpful to have these opportunities. I'll also note for the new members that the steering committee is really a function of your governance discussions from the inaugural EAG, making a decision to have a committee to help steer and guide your activities rather than having a hierarchical or I guess what I'd call a more traditional approach. The thought was that the steering committee would be the best way to allow for some leadership and direction for this group. So I'm sure there'll be opportunities to discuss your participation at that level as well. Okay, let us move forward because we're a little behind time, but we're going to catch up. Brian Tyson is our manager of clean energy strategy. Let me welcome you, Brian, to introduce our discussion on DER.
All right, good to be here. I'll hopefully get everyone caught up here. So welcome new members. It's the first time many of you have probably seen me, but I'm here to pretty much set the stage for our main stars today that are going to talk a bit deeper about distributed energy resources. I want to set the stage because there's a number of conversations that we have to have leading up to our biennial update, which is going to be due November 1. And so we've sort of mapped out some of the topics we're going to discuss in the next two months coming. Today's topic is on some of those distributed energy resources, but also some of the engagement we did over the past few years since we turned in that first CEIP. So let's go ahead and dive right in. I'll first start with this because I know we have a few new members. Just really want to understand what is this biennial update that we've been talking about. We did a CEIP, our Clean Energy Implementation Plan. That was our 4-year roadmap. And then halfway through that 4-year period, we have an opportunity to update that plan with new information, new assumptions, things like that. And so what we've tried to do is really map out where do we believe EAG input can really shape our biennial update. And one of the areas is the one we're going to talk about today, which is DER program design, program engagement, where our experts are going to come talk about some of the things they heard and get your feedback on design for a couple of the programs as well. And as you can see here, there's some other areas, and we'll touch on them later on throughout the next few months. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there's a host of issues that we'd like to bring to the EAG, and so you all have seen this. The last meeting, many of you saw this at the last meeting, just to really map out all the different topics. Today, like I said, we're focused on those clean energy program design products that our experts are going to come talk about in a few moments here. Okay, next slide, please. I want to start a bit with some key terms. Someone asked this earlier, what are DERs? We throw acronyms around a lot here. And so hopefully we do a better job of just calling these out early on. And so I want to call these out because our experts are going to use these a lot. So when you hear demand side resources, that's really just a culmination of various types of energy resources on the customer side. We've already covered distributed energy resources, so DERs, that's a common one. You'll hear that one a lot. And as Kara talked about earlier, you think about your rooftop solar or some battery storage. So we'll have a discussion on some of those. And then demand response. You may hear us say DR. Those are just demand response programs. And they're really there to help sort of shift the energy use during certain times of day. Okay, next slide, please. When we put together our CEIP, there were a couple of targets and there were also some sub-targets. And so I want to dive into the DER sub-targets here. So we proposed sub-targets of 25 megawatts of battery storage, 80 megawatts of distributed solar, and then about 24 megawatts of demand response. And our team is going to come and talk a bit about each of these different targets and how they're planning to build programs to meet some of these targets that you see here. Next slide, please. Now, they're also going to talk about various program product types, and it really, some of it boils down to the ownership model that you see here. And so we like to show this picture just so you understand that there are some that'll be customer owned, and it gives you a visual of where a customer owned resource may be. Think about sort of behind the meter, behind your meter at your home. Then there are some that are PSE owned that can cover anywhere from behind the meter to front of the meter. And so our team is going to talk about a range of those different products. So just to give you all understanding that products can be placed sort of at different places along the system. And the team has looked at various programs and various products to really cover the gamut here, the spectrum that you see of where the ownership models can be. Okay, next slide, please. Now, a reminder, we came in October, almost 10 months ago almost. We came a long time ago to talk about engagement goals and to really talk about how should our teams go out, talk to community-based organizations, talk to customers, how should we address, how should we raise questions, things like that. And you all brought a lot of information back to us. You told us about who to reach out to specifically, and there's a list of organizations that we reach out to. You talked about things we should be aware of. So how do we bring up certain topics? How do we bring it up so that it's tangible, so that it makes sense, so that it's easily digestible? And so we took a lot of that feedback, and our experts went out, did a number of focus groups and one-on-one sessions, things like that, to various organizations. Now we've come back. Now we're ready to come back and present what we heard and to talk about how we've reshaped and thought about redoing some of the programs that we plan to design and launch in the coming years here. So before we go forward, I'm going to introduce, we have 4 experts to talk to you today. First, Mackenzie Martin, she's going to talk about community engagement overall. So she's really going to dive deep into what you all provided, feedback you all provided, and then what she heard, and then that allowed us to create other programs. Then we'll have Heather Malcolm come, and she's going to talk, Heather Mulligan, and she's going to talk about community solar updates. And this is where your feedback is going to be greatly needed. She's going to ask you some questions about changes to program design and really looking for the EAG to provide feedback there. And there's Malcolm McCullough. He's going to talk about distributed storage and some of the options there. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with Jeff Tripp. He's going to give an update on some of our demand response programs. I think that's it. Now, I think I'll turn it to Mackenzie.
Yes, thanks, Brian. And we can go ahead and go to the first slide. So our department, Customer Clean Energy Solutions, has been on a journey of increasing procedural equity in our work by giving our highly impacted communities, vulnerable populations, and the community-based organizations, tribal entities, and government agencies that serve them a seat at the design table. So between September of last year and May of this year, we conducted community engagement on future distributed energy resource or DER products, and that included batteries, solar, and demand response. So throughout this engagement process, these customers shared the barriers that may exist for themselves and their communities when accessing future DER products, and how PSE can better design those products to alleviate barriers and maximize the benefits customers feel are most important to themselves. So in fall of 2022, we were in the planning stage of the community engagement process. And as Brian mentioned, we came to the EAG, presented the community engagement goals listed here, and asked you which stakeholders you felt we should be engaging with, how to best connect with them, as well as some preliminary barriers you felt are associated with accessing DERs. So now we have concluded that community engagement. Back to share the high-level results, and I'll also point out how we included your feedback from the fall. Next slide, please. Our engagement process began with introductory calls, interviews, and focus groups with customers that primarily focused on high-level benefits and barriers related to those future programs and services. And at the urging of the EAG and all of the education outreach barriers that you all brought up, we had a specific segment on education and outreach tactics that PSE could use with communities. We use the outcomes of those interviews and focus groups to draft solar, battery, and demand response program concepts, which we then tested in workshops with customers. So these workshops focused on enrollment eligibility, ownership structures, incentive levels, and siting considerations, among others. So participants were asked to tell us what they liked, what they didn't like, and what was missing from those concepts. And then the last step was a survey to only residential customers to measure some overall sentiment on DERs and also test product concepts similar to what was shared with residents in the workshops. And all of this work culminates in a final report that will be available to the public later this summer. And to develop a transparent and continuous feedback loop, we shared notes from the engagements with the participants after they occurred. We will share the final community engagement report, any draft and final tariffs that happen as a result of the work, and any notifications of program launches with each interview, focus group, and workshop participant. And at each step, we've been asking them to let us know if they feel their feedback was not appropriately recorded or represented. And to further reduce engagement barriers for communities, compensation was offered to all participants. We offered a selection of engagements, including our survey in Spanish, which was another suggestion provided by the EAG. And we held meetings outside of business hours and offered in-person engagements to make it more accessible to residents. Next slide. So these future DER products will include programs for both residential customers as well as commercial customers. So we wanted to connect with both of those customer segments through this work. We engaged with over 350 residential customers with a focus on limited income households, rural communities, BIPOC communities, and those whose first language is not English. Another group on this, not on this list, that we had some specific engagement with were seniors on fixed incomes. And we predominantly reached these customers at the EAG's suggestion through trusted community-based organizations in their community. And then we also wanted to engage with those commercial customers whose primary mission is to serve and benefit the aforementioned residential customers. So we reached out to over 100, and we were able to connect with 61 of those commercial customers, and that included community-based organizations and nonprofits like food banks and veterans organizations, the planning departments of tribal entities, other government entities like senior centers, transit agencies, and schools, and then some small businesses focused on community involvement or betterment. And some of the outreach to these service providers was at the EAG's suggestion as well, specifically the tribes, school districts, and downtown associations. Next slide. And while there's a lot of detail and nuance in the final report, I'll share some of our key takeaways from the work. Probably unsurprisingly, upfront and ongoing maintenance costs were consistently highlighted as the largest barrier across all of the DER products and for all customer segments. So while suggestions to alleviate the barrier were unique among solar, battery, and demand response engagements, there was a clear ask for financial incentives that substantially offset the financial costs, taking it down to zero where possible that customers may face when participating in DER products. And then the installation and maintenance associated with DER implementation can feel daunting to customers. So in order to facilitate adoption of DERs, PSE will need to be prepared with tailored, holistic, and hands-on installation and maintenance support for the customers that request it. While similar themes emerged across many engagements, it also became clear how diverse each stakeholder's needs and interests could be. So the final products PSE designs must be flexible enough to alleviate the nuanced challenges each customer will face based on their size, geographic location, the services they provide, and whether they rent or own their property. A key piece of our workshops was testing customer preference for asset ownership in these DER programs, a lot like the slide Brian showed you. And the outcome was really mixed there. Engagement participants differed on their preference for renting versus owning assets like solar panels. Those who preferred PSE-owned options articulated an inability to afford the upfront costs associated with asset procurement and installation, along with the ongoing cost of maintenance. But those who preferred customer-owned options typically valued the autonomy and control of ownership. So similar to the flexibility theme that I talked about, where possible, PSE should provide both options to meet a diverse set of customer needs. And what we found motivating and exciting is that while certain DRs are a better fit for certain customers across all engagements, participants indicated a strong interest in participating in future DER products. So participants highlighted the importance of energy independence, community or personal energy resilience, and reduction in energy bills as the benefits that would most motivate them to participate in DER products. And last one, while customers expressed a strong motivation to participate in DERs, we realized throughout the engagements that there are many education outreach gaps left to fill. So customers want foundational questions about costs, environmental impacts, and community benefits answered to help them make informed decisions about product participation. They suggested PSE partner with CBOs and utilize their deep existing community relationships to educate customers. And that knowledge gap that exists as a result of the lack of education outreach to date, we think may be translating to limited interest in these types of products and a distrust of the tangible benefits they can provide communities. So a lot of work to be done in that space specifically. So again, we are committed to translating all this community feedback where possible into our program design. Next, I'll hand it off to Heather Mulligan, who will talk about specific feedback we received through this engagement on community solar and our plans to change the income eligible community solar program as a result.
Thanks, Mackenzie, and thank you all members of the EAG for being here tonight and sitting through these presentations. So I wanted to share with you, first of all, what community solar is. I know some of you are new, so if you'll go to the next slide, please. I just make sure we're grounding everybody in what community solar is. The community solar program was first launched in 2021, and we currently have about 11 megawatts of community solar installed at sites like the one you see here, which is a high school. Participants are able to subscribe to shares from a specific solar project. Each of those shares is 1.46 kilowatts, which is basically roughly equivalent to the amount of energy needed to run an energy efficient refrigerator for the course of a year. General participants pay $20 per month for their share, while for income eligible customers, that cost is waived. So it's $0 for those customers. And then participants receive a monthly credit on their energy bill for all of the energy produced by their share. For income eligible customers, that monthly credit amount is a fixed credit so that they know what they're getting on their bill each month. And then there's an one-time annual true up to make sure that they are credited with the actual generate for any extra actual generation produced by the project. And these, when Brian talked earlier about front of the meter, behind the meter projects, these are front of the meter projects where all of the school, for instance, in this picture is a host for the project. The energy flows out onto the system, but is subscribed to by the participants in community solar. So it's not actually serving the energy needs of the school, but the school is receiving a lease payment for the use of their roof for the project. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to share a little bit about the journey we've been on. As I said, this program was launched in 2021, but after we had engaged in some work with our low-income advisory committee to understand the needs of our income eligible customers, and their feedback really helped us to design and launch that program. Now the program's been up and running for almost 2 years, and we're re-engaging with customers and interested parties to determine what process improvements we can make to do even better. And as Mackenzie mentioned, over the last 6 months, we've been conducting community engagement efforts with income eligible customers and their service providers on a variety of future DER programs. But we've also asked customers a suite of questions on community solar. Typically, those customers don't have much familiarity with community solar. So to supplement that, we were surveying current income eligible community solar subscribers to learn how we can improve the program. And in terms of advisory groups, we presented to the low income advisory committee in May. Now we're coming to you today to share our planned changes and ask for your feedback on one of our proposed changes, although we'd love your feedback on all of these items. Once we've concluded our engagement, the revised tariffs will be filed later this month or early next month with approval from the Utilities and Transportation Committee expected in August. Next slide, please. So a large part of our DER engagement was a survey in both English and Spanish with over 200 limited income households that included questions on community solar. While this is only one piece of the feedback puzzle in this engagement, what we heard was a really strong interest from customers. In fact, over 85% of those surveyed customers indicated an interest in enrolling in community solar, with 60% saying they were very interested and 25% saying they were somewhat interested. We then asked customers that expressed interest what was intriguing to them about community solar, and environmental and resiliency factors ended up outweighing financial benefits. So customers ranked community energy resilience and taking action to reduce climate change as being the most important benefits of community solar. Beyond that, they ranked reducing my energy bill above subscribing to a project that is close to where I live. We also asked customers what barriers they perceive to enrolling in community solar in order of importance, and included any upfront subscription costs, wanting to install solar on their own property instead, potential difficulties using a website to sign up, and there was a minor concern about solar arrays impacting aesthetics of their communities. One of the things we really wanted to test out was what on-bill credit would incentivize customers to move past barriers that they had flagged. When asked to assume that their monthly subscription fee had been waived, what monthly bill credit would encourage them to enroll in community solar? We saw a wide range from $5 to $5,000 a month. But once we removed the outliers, the median most common customer response was $50 a month. Next slide, please. What you see here are a few of the proposed changes that we're looking to make. First, we are looking to expand the eligibility criteria. One of the things we've heard from the EAG and other stakeholders is that the various criteria used for our programs and services at PSE is confusing and difficult, and we need to expand eligibility. Currently, households at or below 200% of federal poverty level are eligible, and we're proposing to expand that to include 80% area median income whichever is higher. And we think this aligns with other income eligible programs across the company, and it also expands access to an additional 150,000 customers, which we think is a good thing. The other thing we're looking to do is expand funding for income eligible shares. So currently we have various prescriptive funding sources, state renewable energy incentive programs, Department of Commerce grants, various third-party sources, and customer funds from other voluntary programs. What we're proposing is to enhance the flexibility of and access to funds so that we can allow additional funding sources to be considered and to expand the number and amount of income eligible shares available. So currently we've been targeting about 20% of community solar available to income eligible participants, and we'd like to expand that to 30%, which is also very consistent with things that we've heard through the CEIP, or the Clean Energy Implementation Plan order. So we think that's the right direction. And then lastly, on this list, we look to update the credit calculation. So currently, as I said, customers receive an energy credit on their bill equivalent to 4.5 cents per kilowatt hour generated by their share. That credit calculation is currently static and we believe outdated and based on a previous methodology that is really no longer serving us. So we believe it's time to update that credit to better align with energy costs and with CETA values. And we believe that by updating the credit, it'll actually increase value to all participants of community solar by increasing the credit amounts that they receive. Next slide, please. So this leads me to the question that we have for you all tonight. And where we could really use some additional feedback and support. Currently, we limit participation to 1 share per household. And that value is somewhere between $7 to $11 per month, depending on where their project is located. West side projects tend to be in the $7 range. Projects east of the mountains in Kittitas County tend to be at $11 per month, and that's at the current credit amount. So keep in mind that if our tariff is approved, then that amount will be higher. But what we're proposing is to actually increase that limit from 1 share to 2 shares, which would double the value that customers see on their bill. So if we were to consider the current credit amount, that would double it to $14 or $22 a month. Not quite at that $50 range that we heard from customers, but we think that once we update that credit, we'll be much closer to the $50. However, there is a trade-off with doing that, and that is that, we have limited numbers of income eligible shares, and by allowing 2 shares per household, that would decrease the number of households we could serve through community solar. So there's a trade-off in creating greater on-bill benefit for customers versus reducing the number of customers who could participate. So our question for the EAG is, how do we ensure the most meaningful equity impacts considering the trade-offs between larger energy cost reductions for less customers versus smaller energy cost reductions for more customers? And with that, before we go into breakout rooms, I just wanted to see if there's any questions. I've seen that there's some stuff happening on chat. I haven't been able to look at that. So if I can answer questions from the chat, please let me know. And G, I see that you're up.
Thank you, Heather. Perfect. Can we move to the next slide? So I'm just going to do a very high level sort of level set for all of us on what a residential battery is. And, that really is, as we've seen in some of the stuff that Mackenzie presented, customer owned battery or utility owned battery. It's really installed behind the meter. The interconnection is to our distribution system, and it can be dispatched by PSE to help with our system peaks. And it can be used also as an opportunity to store
solar, and most specifically coming from, the connected solar at the home, and, can provide backup power, and also can help customers manage their energy usage. There are future value streams as we get more technically advanced, and those include frequency response and energy arbitrage. But really the focus for our conversation today is to talk a little bit more in detail about some of the barriers and benefits that we heard from our customers as it relates to residential batteries, some of the design concepts that they brought forward as important, and then to give you some of the observations we have at this point regarding the battery market and some potential pathways we have looking forward. And really, we want to get your feedback on those potential pathways forward. So let's go to the next slide. Thank you. So a lot of this is repetitive to what you heard from Mackenzie, but consistently what we heard from customers regarding residential batteries is that the high upfront cost is the biggest barrier. So just to give you some framework of what that cost could be, cost for just a battery installation on its own can be anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000. And that's really predicated on not only the technology that needs to be installed, but also the readiness of the property. And a lot of times it requires either upgrades to the service panel or upgrades to the service from the utility. So that's something that we need to be caring for, and customers are definitely conscious of. And then, there are some things that again, Mackenzie brought up regarding distrust of the utility and the vendors, and just making sure that customers don't feel like, they're being caught with those high cost items unaware. And then, safety became another item that came up. And these are all sort of indicative of, a lack of education and outreach that exists today in the market regarding sort of battery energy storage. The primary benefit that we heard from customers was really backup power. So concern around outages and making sure that they had access to backup power in that situation. And we heard this from some of our rural communities, as well as customers that have medical device security issues that they want to be concerned with. But we also know that the other benefits that we heard from customers is really around the bill savings. Now, this bill savings is if it is paired with a solar system, and then having some energy independence, and also being able to take advantage of sort of future products and or capabilities that come with our battery technology. So the next slide is really going to talk through some of the program design preferences, and really around ownership. As Mackenzie said, customers are really split. I think what we heard from folks was, if the utility owned the battery, that would really help me mitigate some of the concerns I have around trust around vendors, make sure that I don't have to worry about maintenance or upkeep, make sure that it's installed safely. But then, when we talk to customers about whether they wanted to have a battery and solar program, some customers, prefer to actually own their own solar. It was really important to them. So, there's a little bit of a mixed perspective there. And that's why, one of the things we look at is making sure that we have, flexibility in the options that we present to customers. And then as it relates to load management, so this is, again, the ability for the utility to access that battery to help address some peak issues. Really, customers showed a preference to having more of their battery at their use, as opposed to giving the utility access to a considerable portion of that battery storage. They also had some concerns around sort of the reliability of the battery, transparency and sort of visibility to their system, and wanted to have an option to opt out or have more control. And then the other thing that we heard from customers, given the fact that access to and utilizing that battery requires internet connectivity, that this can be an issue for a lot of customers, and making sure that we consider that in sort of how we address the design of these programs. So if we go to the next slide, sort of our initial observations based on what we see in the market today, and also what the feedback is we had from customers, is this is still a very nascent product or technology. The customer's education across the board is still very limited. There is a very prohibitive cost barrier that customers have to address. And, the market is still growing as far as installation and capabilities. And, it is unlikely that the battery alone will provide any benefit to a customer other than backup power. However, if it's not paired with solar, the customer is actually going to have to pay to have that battery, battery storage filled through their utility service. So it actually could cost them more. And, as I said, there are future capabilities that we are working toward. And one of those is time of use rates. And I mentioned frequency response and arbitrage. And those are likely going to be available in the market by 2025. So as we think about a pathway forward, obviously we really believe that developing inclusive and relevant educational materials and making sure we're working with trusted messengers to sort of build capacity for learning is really important. We do believe that it's still really important to connect customers to existing products that we have that, in the near term can help them reduce their energy burden. A prime example is, if a customer is interested in installing a battery, but, the weatherization of their home has not been addressed, they're actually, not taking care of the least cost problem. So how do we make sure that we're helping customers get connected to those capabilities, and maybe thinking about that in our design or eligibility criteria? And then we will continue to monitor the market and make sure that, we understand where that opportunity is to be available. But, in the interim, I think there's a potential for us to explore some pilots to help inform sort of what the battery offerings look like. And those would be more from the technical side, right? How does it get connected? Do we have internet connectivity? Is there issues with upgrading systems in homes? And really make sure we're working through to remove the complexity for customers if we bring a program forward, so that it's simple, easy, and to get the access to those benefits right off the bat. So next slide. It's really discussion. And we didn't have time. I don't think we're going to have time to do this outside, but would be interested if anybody had an opportunity to drop, some comments into the chat. And some of the things we're really making sure that we understand from the EAG's perspective is, are there barriers that we did not include or we did not hear from customers that we should, consider as we go through the design process? And or, should we be prioritizing sort of mitigating some of those barriers more than others?